Hi, my name is Miriam Memarsadeghi. I'm co-founder and co-director of Tavaana, e-learning institute for Iranian civil society. I'm very pleased to be here today with Dr. Stephen لاکرت, curator of the permanent exhibition at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This conversation is going to be aired on satellite networks to the Persian and Arabic language audiences with subtitles. So let's begin by looking into the future first. Why is remembering the Holocaust important to the future of freedom and human rights?
I think studying the Holocaust and learning from the Holocaust are extremely important for everyone in the world because it shows us the kind of fragility of democracy, the dangers of racism, of anti-Semitism, of bigotry, and also just where that can lead. What we see in this history is a country, Germany, that began 1933 as a democracy, but quickly the rights of its citizenry were dismantled and democracy was destroyed in a very short amount of time. And in its place you have a dictatorship, personal freedoms disappear, the persecution of minorities, the Jewish population begins, the creation of concentration camps, and all that happened in a very short amount of time.
So we shouldn't be comfortable even if we have a democratic system.
No, I think we always have to jealously guard our rights as citizens in a democracy and to protect those rights.
And why was a Holocaust Memorial Museum created in the United States? And what type of institutions that are similar, what kind exist in other places in the world?
Well, the origins of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum go back to the late 1970s. And it was President Carter gave kind of an authorization to create a commission to look into the establishment of a museum and memorial. And out of that came a report, and eventually Congress approved the creation of this museum. And so it's a kind of a unique institution that's built on federal lands, but it was built with private donations.
Wow.
And so that public-private partnership is extremely important to us. And we've had, I think, about 39 million visitors have passed through our doors since we opened in 1993. So it's a remarkable story.
Extremely impressive that this was actually created out of a concerned community, and they gave funds for this to exist. So how was that process? How difficult was it to gain those funds and get started?
Well, I think it was a remarkable story because you had survivors, Holocaust survivors playing such an instrumental role in calling the American public's attention to the need to create something like this, and to also get people thinking about their responsibilities as citizens in a democracy, but also to think in terms of what was happening in our own day, to think for them to be conscious of acts of contemporary genocide. And I think that went into the very origins of this institution, and something that we take pride in. And I think you had donations, from school teachers, from various people throughout the American community who wanted to support such an institution.
It's such an impressive institution. So professionally done, so overwhelmingly moving. It's good to know that ordinary individuals can come together to create such a memorial and such a museum. So can you just say a bit about the significance of where this is located, the other museums, and how visitors come to the museum, and how it's so very accessible to everybody?
Well, the museum is located right near the mall in Washington, so it's close to the Smithsonian institutions. It's right near the Washington Monument, and the White House can overlook this museum. So in many ways, we're kind of a voice of conscience in America's capital. And we get visitors from all over the world to see our exhibitions, to visit the museum, to learn about contemporary genocide. And I think we're in a wonderful location for that.
Yes.
And we're also reaching out to the world from Washington.
Right. And are there similar institutions in other parts of the world, particularly Israel?
Yeah, in Israel you have Yad Vashem in Jerusalem that began in the 1950s, and again largely through the efforts of survivors, but also through through government support. You also had, even perhaps earlier, in Poland, you had the creation of the State Museum of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and also the State Museum of Majdanek, sites of Nazi killing that were created into museums.
And of course we have the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, other ways to remember. What about in Germany itself?
Oh yeah, in a number of places throughout Germany there are the sites of former concentration camps have been established as important memorials. And you have right in Berlin, you have a memorial to the Jews who were murdered by the Nazis, as well as memorials to the Roman Sinti, the gypsies that were killed during the Holocaust. So memorialization plays an important role in various places around the world.
And what here at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, what is the particular approach to telling the history? How does the museum operate? Can you kind of take us through the philosophy, the aesthetics?
Well, I think the museum, the museum's permanent exhibition was very unique in many ways and very pioneering in its use of the narrative, so that you go up to the 4th floor of the building and you work your way down. You follow a linear path, and it tells the story of how the Holocaust occurred. So the top floor, it spends a lot of time discussing the ways in which the Nazis destroyed democracy in Germany and began implementing their radical and extremist racial and political programs. And then you move into the next floor, which discusses the ghettoization and mass murder. And then the last floor raises questions about individual responsibility, so that those people who became rescuers, those people who resisted, those people who were bystanders, those people who were liberators, and those that were perpetrators. So it raises a lot of questions for the public to think about. The ways in which democracy was destroyed, the ways in the dangers of anti-Semitism and racism, but also the question of individual responsibility.
If interested Iranians from inside Iran could magically transport themselves and be here at the museum, what would you insist that they see, that they do?
Actually, I think that it's the first floor of the exhibition that shows the destruction of democracy, the creation of this dictatorship with these radical goals, the implementation of anti-Semitic policies, the mass arrests of political opponents. I think this is extremely important, and I think it's something that the Iranian people can well understand.
Unfortunately, yes. Beyond the physical walls of the museum itself, you do much outreach globally, including to the Middle East and including Iran. What has proven most effective in your efforts to reach the Arab world and the Persian-speaking world?
Well, I think one of the important things is that we're doing this, that there's an audience out there that's interested in this topic, and I think just getting that information out there and actually having responses back from those communities shows that there's an interest in this history, getting the history, one might say, told in a truthful manner.
Right. Yeah, certainly we have shared on the Tawana website and social networks and on satellite TV channels into Iran some of your resources, and they have been among our most popular, our most discussed, our most polemical, and really, I have to say, among the most touching. They strike a nerve, and immediately Iranians get the parallels, the dangers, and a lot of linking to the repression that they that they face on a daily basis, and also particularly the persecution of religious minorities, and especially the Baha'i in Iran. When people say that the Holocaust was but one of many genocides, what do you say to them?
Well, in that sense, they're correct, that the Holocaust is perhaps the greatest example of mass murder and genocide in world history, where you had a state dedicated to the annihilation of an entire people. And I think that in some ways this is kind of the classic example of genocide. But there are other examples that have occurred in more recent times, whether that's in Rwanda, whether that's in Bosnia. Mass atrocities continue into our own day, and that's something we should be conscious of and something that we should fight against. And I think the Holocaust serves as an important warning about that, about the threat of genocide and what it can lead to.
And what do you say to people when they say, but in such and such a war, or such and such a war, or under Stalin, more people died? So why is this such a big deal? Why should we talk about the Holocaust so much?
Well, I think it's important to look at the kind of differences as well. That here you had a regime that was dedicated to first segregating and ostracizing groups within that population that were citizens, and transforming them into pariahs, and then making the move to mass extermination of the Jewish population. Not just in Germany, but outside of that. That is, the Nazis' goal was to make this the total extermination of an entire people. And so I think that this is what kind of distinguishes it from other examples of mass murder in the world.
Okay. Anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial are growing in many parts of the world, including especially Europe these days. How do you account for this resurgence of hatred?
Well, it's a difficult challenge to know why at given times where you have kind of spikes in anti-Semitism. Recently, Europe experienced, various spikes in the levels of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. In recent months and years, there's been a dramatic increase in levels of anti-Semitism in various places in Europe. And with that, also Holocaust denial. And in some ways, this is both a frightening and startling picture. Because, for instance, in Europe, you have great knowledge about the Holocaust. Large numbers of people know about it. You have memorials in all of these places. And yet you have the growth of anti-Semitism in some of these places. What's, I think, is also important is that you have groups that are combating that. And I think the museum is active in trying to combat anti-Semitism, both in Europe, here, and in the Middle East, through its website, through its programs. And I think that's a very important thing.
And particularly about this combating anti-Semitism in the here and now, what gives you optimism, inspiration? What are you hopeful about with that regard?
Well, I think that you have, first of all, concern on the part of people, whether that's Angela Merkel in Germany, who came out and spoke against anti-Semitism in Germany and in Europe, where you have groups, actually trying to counter anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial using social media. And I think that that's an optimistic sign. I think that there's more that has to be done. But I think that's a good effort when you do have people taking advantage of new technology, people taking advantage of outlets, whether that's in the media or elsewhere, to get the message out that anti-Semitism, that racism, that bigotry are evil things that need to be combated.
Right. And you started this conversation talking about the importance in the final stages of the permanent exhibition, the importance of civic responsibility, individual conscience, and acting on what our own conscience tells us is right and wrong, and listening to that. How do you tell others about their civic responsibility in the here and now, and how important is that to the message of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum?
I think it's extremely important as a message that we want visitors to leave with, that they can play a role, that what they do matters in our own day, just as what people did in the 1930s and 40s mattered. So some people chose to rescue or aid someone that was in danger. Some people chose to protest those actions of Nazi Germany. And some people chose to go along with them. I think one of the challenges that we face is not necessarily that just the perpetrators that commit these acts of evil, but the people that are indifferent to it.
Right.
Because I think for me, one of the greatest dangers that we saw in Nazi Germany was that the Nazis cultivated a climate of indifference where the average person said, well, it's not my problem. It's not my issue. I have greater worries, you know, and that allows the government to have free rein. When nobody protests, when no one contests that, it allows governments to carry out those horrific policies.
Yes. Last question. If somebody from Tehran or Cairo or Tunis were to say to you, what can I do? What can I do to be helpful in educating other people about the Holocaust, in warning about the dangers of anti-Semitism and hatred in general, genocide, persecution? What would you say to them?
I think it's important for everyone, regardless of where they live, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Europe, to stand up against persecution, oppression, intolerance. Because in the case of Nazi Germany, it was directed against Jews and others. But in other places, it can be directed against a minority. And I think it's important for people in whatever capacity they have to say that's wrong. Sometimes our options are limited. But I think sometimes with social media, even with a voice, even with a voice of support to that individual, can be important.
So more specifically, people who are interested in learning more about the Holocaust or teaching other people, understanding the dynamics of genocide, persecution, intolerance, racism, how can they access your resources?
One of the easiest ways visitors can find out about what the museum does is to go to our website, www.ushmm.org. There they can find a variety of different things, from documents, from articles about this history, to oral testimonies, to information about individuals who went through the Holocaust. And I think this becomes an important way in which we can tell this history by personalizing it. Because people can see someone of their own age, someone of their own gender, and often someone from their own country, and see what that person experienced. Yeah. And I think for people to, when they read those stories or listen to those stories, it makes a very powerful impression on them. So they can not only learn about that for themselves, but they can also share that with other people. And I think that's the wonderful thing about having a website like this, that's provided in a variety of different languages, from Farsi to Arabic to Chinese. And it's just a remarkable place to go to find out more information about this history.
Great. And let me just add that through our work together, Tavaana and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, we have created some materials that are available in Persian that are really adapted specifically for the Iranian audience, a couple of documentaries. We've done a translation of a large history book on the Holocaust called War and Holocaust, translated to Persian. We will soon be offering a full course called Lessons from the Holocaust to be taught by Mohammad Reza Nikfar. We are delighted to have Mr. Nikfar for this important course, and we will be doing a number of other initiatives focused on lessons from the Holocaust and lessons from tolerance around the world, and we will be compiling those resources in both Persian and Arabic, as well as English, actually. Dr. Stephen لاکرت, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.